My daughter didn't ask for help. She asked for a sacrifice. Take the blame or lose everything. Before I go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, because the decision I was forced to make that night still keeps me awake. I'm not a man who scares easily. I'm in my late 60s. I've buried my wife, retired from a career that took more out of me than I ever admitted, and survived enough quiet disappointments to know the difference between fear and pressure. But the way my daughter looked at me that evening, that was something else. It wasn't anger. It wasn't panic. It was calculation. And that's what chilled me. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where she used to do her homework, where her mother once planned birthdays and holidays. The light above us flickered softly, buzzing in a way I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed and I just never cared, until that moment. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, folding her hands together. That sentence alone should have warned me. It wasn't a request. It was a setup, and I felt it settling into my chest before she even continued. She slid her phone across the table toward me. The screen was dark, untouched, waiting. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I could already tell whatever was on it wasn't meant to help me. It was meant to corner me. "There's been a situation," she said. "Something that went wrong. And if this comes out the wrong way, I'm finished." I watched her closely. Her foot tapped the floor, fast and nervous. She wasn't used to waiting. Not with me. I'd always been the one to fill the silence, to rescue her from it. But not this time. I stayed quiet, and that silence stretched until she broke. "They think it was you." The words landed softly. Too softly, like she was testing how much weight they could carry before they collapsed. I felt my fingers curl against the wood of the table. Not in anger, in recognition. I'd heard that tone before, in courtrooms, in offices, in rooms where people try to pass responsibility like a disease. "Think what was me?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough to confirm my worst instinct. Then she finally looked me in the eye. "The missing funds, the complaint, the formal review," she said. "If you step forward and say you made the call, that you approved it, it all stops." I leaned back in my chair, slowly, carefully, because I could already see where this road led, and I want to be sure I wasn't imagining it. "And if I don't?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. She swallowed once. Then she said it. "Then I'll tell them everything." There it was. The threat, not shouted, not dramatized, delivered like a business decision. And in that moment, I realized something painful. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. I laughed once. A short, dry sound I didn't recognize as my own. "Everything." I repeated. "You mean things that aren't true?" She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The way she looked away told me all I needed to know. "They won't care about details," she said quietly. "They'll care about who looks believable." I felt the room tilt slightly, like I'd stood up too fast. Years of reputation, of quiet consistency, of never being the man who caused trouble. And suddenly, all of it felt fragile. "Do you understand what you're asking?" I said. She nodded. "Yes." "Do you understand what that would do to me?" Another nod, slower this time. "I do." That was when it hit me hardest. Not the threat itself, but the certainty behind it. She wasn't bluffing. She'd already decided. She was just offering me a role to play. I told her I needed time. She told me time was the one thing she didn't have. Deadlines were approaching. Questions were being asked. And if I didn't step in soon, the story would write itself, with or without my consent. As she stood to leave, she paused at the doorway. "I hope you choose wisely," she said. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. I stayed at that table long after she left, staring at the empty chair across from me. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt heavier than they should have. I knew I was standing at the edge of something irreversible, because the choice wasn't just about blame. It was about what would happen after I made it, and that was the part she hadn't explained yet. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of what my daughter had threatened, but because I couldn't stop replaying how calmly she'd said it. That was what unsettled me most. Fear screams, panic pleads, but certainty whispers. By morning, I'd made coffee I didn't drink and stare out a window I'd looked through for decades, suddenly unsure what kind of man was reflected in the glass. The phone sat on the counter, silent, innocent. I knew it wouldn't stay that way. Before I go any further, let me ask you something, and be honest. What would you do if the person you raised tried to erase you to save themselves? Comment below, because I wrestled with that question longer than I care to admit. Her message came just after 9. No greeting, no warmth. They're asking questions today. I read it twice, then a third time. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. Institutions always start with questions. Then they move to conclusions. And once conclusions are written down, they don't erase easily. I called her. She answered immediately, like she'd been holding the phone. They want a statement, she said. Just something preliminary. Nothing official yet. Yet, I repeated, this is the window, she said. If you wait, it closes. I asked her to explain exactly what she expected me to say. She sighed, annoyed now, like I was slowing her down. That you made a decision, she said. That you handled it without looping me in. That I found out afterward. And the truth, I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the truth doesn't help anyone. That sentence stayed with me. It echoed in my head long after the call ended. Because somewhere along the way, my daughter had learned to separate truth from usefulness. And I couldn't remember teaching her that. I spent the afternoon digging through old files. Not because I needed proof. I already knew where I stood, but because I needed to understand how she'd gotten here. How the child who once cried over broken toys had learned to treat people like expendable parts. What I found didn't surprise me, but it confirmed something darker. Emails, approval chains, digital footprints. Everything pointed exactly where I knew it would. Away from me. Cleanly, clearly, but only if someone bothered to look closely. And that's when I realized her real gamble. She wasn't betting on lies. She was betting on indifference. I remembered her words from the night before. They won't care about details. They'll care about who looks believable. And she was right. I was old, retired, convenient, a background figure. I fit the narrative too well. Late that afternoon, she showed up again. This time she didn't sit. She stood near the door, coat still on, eyes sharp. They're expecting an answer, she said. Today. I asked her a question then, one I hadn't planned but needed answered. What happens to me after? I asked. She blinked. What do you mean? After I take the blame, I said. After I step forward and say it was me, what happens to my name? My record? My life? She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But I saw it. They won't go that far, she said. It'll fade. I nodded slowly. And if it doesn't? Her voice hardened. You're exaggerating. That's when I knew she'd already accepted the possibility. She just didn't want to say it out loud. I stood up then, slowly. My knees protested, but I ignored them. I walked past her to the hallway mirror and looked at myself properly for the first time since she'd made her demand. The man staring back at me looked tired, but he didn't look guilty. I need until tomorrow, I said. Her head snapped toward me. You said you'd think about it. I did, I replied. Now I need to decide. She stared at me like she was recalculating. Then she nodded once. Tomorrow morning, she said. If you haven't agreed by then, I moved forward. She opened the door, then stopped. I don't want to do this, she said quietly. I believed her, and that made it worse. Because wanting and doing are two very different things. The door closed again, and this time, the silence fell heavier. That night, I sat alone and wrote two versions of the same story. One where I stepped forward, one where I didn't. In one version, I lost my name. In the other, I lost my daughter. But as I stared at the pages, I realized something unsettling. Only one of those losses was guaranteed, and the choice I was about to make would decide which one became permanent. Morning came too quickly, not with sunlight or birds, but with the dull weight of knowing this was a day the choice would harden into consequence. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd doze in fragments, waking every hour with the same thought claw at the edges of my mind. If I say yes, there's no undo button. That realization didn't scare me as much as it should have. What frightened me was how easy it would be to say nothing and let the world assume the rest. Before I go on, let me ask you something. If silence could protect someone you love, but destroy you, would you still stay quiet? Think about that, because that was the crossroads I stood at. At exactly 8:30, my phone rang. Not my daughter. An unfamiliar number. I stared at it until it stopped, then rang again and again. Each vibration felt like a countdown I hadn't agreed to start. I answered on the fourth ring. Mr. Callahan? The voice asked, polite and practiced. This is a review office. We like to clarify a few things regarding a recent authorization. There it was. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just an opening. A door cracked wide enough for someone to step through willingly. Yes, I said. I'm aware. They asked if I'd be available later that afternoon to provide a statement. I said I would. The word available felt generous, like I had a choice. When the call ended, my phone buzzed almost immediately. My daughter. Did they call? I didn't reply. I needed to hear her voice again. Needed to be sure I wasn't misreading this entire situation. She arrived an hour later, carrying herself like someone who already knew the outcome. She didn't ask if I'd slept. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She went straight to business. They'll want it in writing. She said. Simple. Clean. I already drafted something. She handed me a folder. Thick. Heavier than paper should have been. Inside was a statement with my name typed neatly at the bottom, waiting for a signature I hadn't given yet. I skimmed the first page. Then the second. Each paragraph chipped away at something I'd built over decades. Responsibility. Oversight. A subtle admission of error wrapped in professional language. It was well written. Too well written. You planned this, I said. She didn't deny it. I prepared for it. For how long? I asked. She looked away. That was answer enough. Something shifted in me then. Not anger. Not even sadness. It was clarity. The kind that arrives quietly and leaves no room for excuses. Sit down, I said. She frowned. We don't have time for... Sit. I repeated. She did. I asked her to walk me through what really happened. Not the version she'd rehearsed. The real one. At first she resisted, circling facts, minimizing choices. But when I stayed silent, truly silent, she cracked. She admitted she'd made the call. She admitted she'd bypassed protocol. She admitted she'd assumed no one would notice. And when they did, she panicked. I thought you'd understand, she said. You always fix things. There it was. The core of it. Not entitlement. Expectation. You didn't ask me to fix it, I said quietly. You asked me to disappear for you. Her eyes filled then. Real tears this time. I'm scared, she whispered. I believed her. And that was a trap. I stood and walked to the window, my back to her. Outside, the world moved on without any awareness of the moment unfolding in my living room. Cars passed. A neighbor watered his lawn. Life continued, indifferent. I have a meeting this afternoon, I said. They expect a statement. She stood abruptly. So you'll do it? I turned to face her, but I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder of my own, one I hadn't mentioned, one I'd assembled quietly over the last 2 days. What's that? She asked. Documentation. I said. Time-stamp records. Independent logs. Enough to tell the full story. Her face drained of color. You went behind my back. No, I said. I stepped out from under it. She shook her head. If you show them that... They'll see the truth, I said. They'll see me. She shot back. Do you know what that will do? I met her gaze steadily. Do you know what lying would do to me? The room felt tight then, like the walls were listening. She lowered her voice. If you don't protect me, I'll protect myself. There it was. The escalation she'd been holding back. How? I asked, her lips pressed together. You don't want to find out. I believed her again. But this time, it didn't move me the way she expected. Because for the first time, I understood something she didn't. She thought she was forcing a choice. But she'd already made one. And now, so would I. I picked up my phone and said, I'm going to make a call. She lunged forward. Wait. I didn't look at her as I dialed. I didn't tell her who I was calling. I didn't explain what I was about to do. I just said, I won't lie for you, and I pressed send. The call connected faster than I expected. That alone told me I'd waited long enough. My daughter stood frozen in the middle of the room, her mouth slightly open, like she wanted to say something, but couldn't decide which version of herself should speak. The confident one, the frightened one, or the calculating one that had brought us here. Mr. Callahan. The voice said on the other end, We're glad you called. So was I. I told them I'd be coming in that afternoon, as requested. I told them I'd bring documentation. I didn't say whose documentation. I didn't explain what it proved. I just said one sentence that changed the temperature in the room. I won't be submitting a prepared statement, I said. I'll be speaking for myself. The silence on the other end lasted half a second longer than normal. Then the voice said, Understood. I ended the call and set the phone down gently, like it might explode if handled too roughly. My daughter stared at me. You promised me time. I gave you honesty. I replied, You just didn't want it. She started pacing then, running a hand through her hair, breathing fast. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, I said. I'm choosing not to vanish. She stopped pacing and looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not as a safety net, not as a solution, as an obstacle. If you go in there with that file, she said, voice low, I will tell them things about you, things they'll have to investigate. That was the moment, the line she couldn't uncross once she'd stepped over it. What things? I asked. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. Your temper, your decisions, your authority over me when I worked under you years ago. I nodded slowly. You're threatening to rewrite history. I'm protecting myself, she snapped. No, I corrected. You're trying to trade my reputation for your comfort. She flinched. The words landed harder than she expected. You raised me, she said bitterly. You taught me how the world works. I held her gaze. I taught you accountability. Somewhere along the way, you replaced it with fear. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said, If you do this, we're done. The ultimatum, finally spoken out loud. I felt its weight settle into the room, heavy and undeniable. This was the real demand, not the blame, not the paperwork. Obedience. I picked up my coat. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I hope someday you understand why I can't do that, I said. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think this is some moral lesson? No, I replied. I think this is a consequence of one. I walked past her toward the door. She didn't follow. She didn't stop me. She just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching a version of me she'd never bothered to know walk away. The drive to the office felt unreal. Like I was moving through a world that hadn't yet caught up to the decision I'd made. Traffic lights, crosswalks, normality. All of it felt staged. Inside the building, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. A receptionist asked me to wait. I sat. I waited. Every second stretched. But I didn't look at my phone. When they finally called me in, I placed a folder on the table between us. I want to be very clear, I said before they could begin. I didn't make the call in question. I didn't approve the action. And I won't accept responsibility for it. They listened. They took notes. They asked questions I prepared for. And when I slid the documentation across the table, I watched their expressions change. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but decisively. Facts have a way of doing that. Halfway through the meeting, one of them excused herself. When she returned, she wasn't alone. Another person joined us. Senior, quiet, observant. They asked one final question. Why are you coming forward now? I answered honestly. Because someone asked me to lie for them. They didn't ask who. They didn't need to. When the meeting ended, they thanked me. They said they'd be in touch. They said things that sounded neutral, but felt final. I walked out into the late afternoon, light, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. Did you do it? I stare at the screen, knowing whatever I replied would seal something permanently. I typed 3 words. I told the truth. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then my phone went silent. And for the first time since this began, I realized something. The threat she'd made wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of her response. The silence lasted 3 days. No messages, no calls, no reaction at all. That, more than anything she'd said before, told me she was still deciding how to strike back. My daughter was never impulsive when it mattered. She waited, she watched, and she chose her moments carefully. On the 4th morning, my phone rang. A known number. I didn't hesitate this time. I answered. Mr. Callahan, the voice said, this is a review committee. We've completed our preliminary findings. I held the phone a little tighter, but my voice stayed calm. Go on. There will be no action taken against you, she said. Your record remains intact. I closed my eyes, not in relief, but in confirmation. And my daughter? I asked. A pause. Not long, but deliberate. That process is ongoing. I thanked her and ended the call. The house felt quieter afterward, like it had exhaled something it had been holding in for years. I sat down at the same kitchen table where this had all begun and let myself feel it. Not victory, not satisfaction, but something steadier. Clarity. That afternoon, I received a message from an old colleague. Then another. Word had moved faster than I expected. Quietly, professionally, without drama. People who knew me didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Reputation, I learned, doesn't shout when it's real. It stands. That evening, my daughter finally called. I almost didn't answer, not out of anger, but because I knew this call would decide what kind of ending the story had. I answered. You ruined me, she said. No greeting. No softness. No, I replied. I stopped you from ruining me. She laughed bitterly. You think that matters? It will, I said. Just not today. She accused me of betrayal, of choosing pride over family, of abandoning her when she needed me most. I listened, all of it, because for the first time, I wasn't responsible for fixing how she felt. When she finished, I said something she wasn't expecting. I still love you. Silence. But I won't lie for you, I continued, and I won't disappear so you can feel safe. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. You let them see me. No, I said gently. I let them see the truth. She hung up. Weeks passed. The formal outcome arrived in the mail. Clean, clinical, final. My name wasn't in it. Hers was. Consequences followed, not catastrophic, but undeniable. Opportunities closed. Doors didn't open. Trust thinned. She moved out of town not long after. No forwarding address. No explanation. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. I think they expect a complicated answer. Something heavy. Something dramatic. But the truth is simple. I regret that she believed control was the same as survival. I regret that she thought love meant sacrifice without consent. I regret that she learned too late that destroying someone else doesn't save you. But I don't regret telling the truth. Because the moment I refused to take the blame for something I didn't do, I taught her the one lesson I should have taught sooner. That dignity isn't negotiable. That love doesn't come with threats. And that if you try to destroy someone to save yourself, you lose both. If this story made you think, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place?